It's a real pleasure to be doing this, and I'm only sorry that I'm not physically with you. It would have been a delight to have escaped our midwinter darkness. The last year has been a real shock for business. Corporate purpose has gone mainstream in a way that was not anticipated just a few years ago. But many businesses see it as a good way of essentially repackaging what they're already doing, a marketing tool promoting their businesses as being enlightened as well as profitable. Business Roundtable statement on corporate purpose in 2019 as being about delivering value to customers, investing in employees, supporting suppliers, caring for communities, and delivering long-term value to shareholders is often derided for not being associated with a change of behavior on the part of many of the Business Roundtable companies. But COVID is changing that. What COVID has done is to make clear why a meaningful corporate purpose matters. The purpose of a business is the reason why it exists, why it's created, and its reason for being. A meaningful purpose, as I see it, of business is to solve problems that you and I face as individuals, as societies, and the natural world, and to do it in a particular way that is commercially viable, financially sustainable, and profitable. And so the way in which I define the purpose of business is to produce profitable solutions for the problems of people and planet, not profiting from producing problems for either. The pandemic has, I believe, given new impetus to this. Pandemics and other crises destroy value, and they create lots of problems, not just for societies and the natural world, but also for business in addition. But for companies whose purposes are to solve problems, those purposes create business opportunities, and the problems become opportunities, not just destroyers of value. So the most successful companies over the last 2 years and presently are those whose purpose is to solve problems, because those are the ones that have been able to pivot their businesses into turning those difficulties into opportunities. And if anyone still thought, even after the pandemic, that nothing had really changed, then COP26 has, I believe, put a firm end to that. A combination of Mark Carney's declaration about the commitment of more than $100 trillion of assets under management to net zero, the International Financial Reporting Standards Foundation announcement of the establishment of a Sustainability Standards Board in Frankfurt, the EU taxonomy and their Articles 8 and 9 definitions of sustainable investments have, I believe, made it clear that this is all for real. What COP26 did was to shift the spotlight from governments to business. Investors are going to be held responsible for how much CO2 is in their portfolios, the global warming associated with their portfolios, but also the social as well as environmental consequences of getting their portfolios down to net zero over a well-defined path. A transition that is unaffordable, inaccessible, or imposes burdens on the poorest in the world is simply no transition. And that places investment institutions under pressure to put companies under pressure to deliver. Corporate purposes of solving problems therefore become not just a source of success, but also of survival of business, a way of de-risking them as well as de-risking the world in which we live. And there is, I believe, no longer any other serious game in town. Business is now expected to lead the charge, particularly in Europe, but increasingly around the world, particularly in Europe because of what the EU is laying down as the expectations on it. Now, one party that is particularly looking for business to do this is the next generation. They're looking to business not only to stop causing problems, but to start providing real solutions, finding ways of solving problems in commercially viable and profitable ways. They're the future entrepreneurs and leaders, not just of multinationals, but also of SMEs. And one institution that I believe should be telling them how to do this is universities. They should be at the vanguard of promoting purposeful businesses. But too many business schools are at the rear guard rather than the vanguard. They've introduced electives on responsible business leadership and ESG. They have research projects on measurement and sustainable finance. They have executive education programs on responsible business, but they haven't recognized the profound change that's needed to promote a change in business. The starting point of traditional business school courses is still the purpose of business is to maximize shareholder value, and everything in terms of the courses on finance, on accounting, marketing strategy follow from that. The starting point should be, what is the purpose of business? What are the problems that a business and sector are solving? For whom, when, and how? What problems are they creating? For whom, when, and how should they avoid them? And everything should then follow from that. And that's not just relevant to the traditional subjects of a business school, it's relevant, of course, to corporate law, regulation, ownership, governance, politics, anthropology, philosophy, indeed all of the humanities and the social sciences, and the physical and biological sciences, in other words, every part of a university. And this should be at the heart of universities, drawing on and contributing everywhere. We should be rethinking the nature of business education and its relevance to universities by drawing on other disciplines. Business schools and universities are uniquely well placed to do this. And just as purposeful businesses are more competitive, resilient, and productive, so purposeful business schools and universities are more distinctive, relevant, and instructive. Now, one aspect of solving problems that I think illustrates this centrality in the nature of a purpose of solving problems is that business cannot solve problems alone. They can't do it even simply by collaborating with each other. They need to do it in conjunction with other parties, with social enterprises, with philanthropic organizations, and above all, with government. But business-government relations often fail. Public-private partnerships, private finance initiatives, and privatizations have been markedly unsuccessful. They've been subject to poor performance, bankruptcy, bribery, and corruption. Often government does not trust business, and business does not trust government. And the reason is a divergence of interest between the two. Business is seeking to maximize profits. Government is seeking to promote the public interest, at least in principle. But if instead business purpose is about solving problems profitably, then instead of a divergence between the two, there is a convergence of interest. There is not just a business purpose, but a common purpose between private and public sectors. Purposeful government is therefore as significant as purposeful business. The purpose of solving problems is therefore a core part of public policy as well as business practice. Together, they can provide the basis for solving global problems of the 21st century. problems of net zero and biodiversity, of regional disparities, inequality and social exclusion, of artificial intelligence and the future of work. And this is inspiring, motivational, and meaningful for employees, entrepreneurs, business leaders, citizens, and societies of the world. Key to this is a new type of leadership, a form of leadership that promotes collaboration and cooperation, not just competition to solve problems. Cooperation to achieve the transformative change that is required to solve problems profitably. This is not just about defining corporate purpose, but a common purpose of societies and firms, a common purpose between business, government, local government, and social enterprise. And let me illustrate this with an example. It's an example of a Danish pharmaceutical company called Novo Nordisk, which makes insulin. Insulin is used in the treatment of type 2 diabetes. Novo Nordisk realized a few years ago that 85% of the type 2 diabetes is found in low and middle income countries, many of which could not afford to purchase its insulin. So it began to reconsider what its then existing purpose of the business was, namely to produce insulin, and recognized that it was more than that, that it was about helping people around the world to treat type 2 diabetes. So it started working with doctors, hospitals, and universities to identify the best way of treating type 2 diabetes in different parts of the world. And then it realized that actually its purpose was even more than helping people to treat type 2 diabetes, that it was to help them avoid getting it in the first place. So they started working with governments, local authorities, health workers, to identify the changes in lifestyle which would help people avoid getting type 2 diabetes at all. Now, you might think that that's all very well and noble, but doesn't it undermine the fundamental model of Novo Nordisk of producing and selling insulin? And the answer to that is that no, its business has actually flourished on the back of it. And there are a number of reasons why that's the case. The most important of which is that in the process of building those relations with other parties, such as doctors and hospitals and governments, it built up relations of trust. It became a trusted supplier, trustworthy, and a trusted supplier of many additional forms of health advice and treatment. Now, I think this illustrates three things. The first is the importance of bringing clarity to what a corporate purpose is about solving problems, and the journey of discovery of what that corporate purpose that Novo Nordisk went through. Secondly, that businesses cannot do this on their own. They have to solve major problems in conjunction with other parties, in this case, such as doctors and universities, but in particular, in conjunction with governments, local authorities, etc. And thirdly, that if a business can do this and can commit to the delivery of its corporate purpose, then it creates the most valuable asset that a company can possess, and that is to be trusted, to be regarded as being trustworthy. And in Oxford, we've been developing a framework to try and assist companies with delivering this commitment to a corporate purpose. We call it the SCORE framework, where the 5 letters of SCORE are an acronym for the management practices that are required to achieve it. The first letter, S, stands for simplify, to simplify the company purpose, to bring real clarity to it along the lines that Novo Nordisk did. The second letter, C, is about connecting the corporate purpose with the company's strategy. The critical element of this notion of purpose is that it is core to a company's business. It is not something that is just done on the side. It's not corporate social responsibility. It's not philanthropy. It's about the core of what a business is doing. It therefore needs to be connected to its strategy. But as the Novo Nordisk case illustrates, it also needs to connect the company with the other organizations that are required to help it to deliver on its purpose of solving problems. The third letter is about ownership, about the ownership of a company's purpose. It needs to be owned by the board of the company, and it also relates to the formal ownership of the company, the shareholders. In the case of Novo Nordisk, it's widely traded on the Danish stock market, but it has a dominant shareholder that controls 75% of the voting shares, which is the Novo Nordisk Foundation, which brings stability to the implementation of its corporate purpose. But it's more than about either ownership by the board or the formal ownership by shareholders. It's about the notion of everyone within the organization feeling their part and appreciating their part of the corporate purpose, how they are contributing to delivering the overall corporate purpose. The fourth letter, R, is about reward, the rewarding of people in the organization in relation to the company's purpose. And that involves measuring the success of the company in delivering on its purpose and relating the incentive arrangements, the rewards and promotion of people in the organization to delivery on that purpose. But it's also about the non-financial elements, about the culture of the organization and the alignment of the culture with the delivery of the corporate purpose. The final letter, E, is about exemplifying the company's purpose, bringing it to life through narratives that demonstrate how the company is delivering on its purpose, but also bringing out the authenticity of the company in terms of narratives about the failures and the challenges in terms of delivering on the purpose, as well as on the successes. Now, a key element of this is in regard to measurement, the way in which a company measures its performance. One of the most significant developments of the post-Second World War period has been the emergence of the notion of being able to summarize the performance of business in a single measure, namely its share price. The share price of the company is the single most significant driver of the largest businesses around the world. Where companies are private and not listed on the stock markets, it's approximated by measures of profits. And share prices and profits are embedded in business practice, business school teaching, and financial investment. They're clear, precise, observable, and actionable. They're actioned by linking every aspect of incentives of organizations to them, the remuneration, promotion, firing, and hiring. In the last 60 years have seen a progressive intensification of share price and profit-driven incentives, stock options, fair value and mark-to-market accounting, financialization, hostile takeovers, and hedge fund activism. We've basically reduced the world to a single measure of performance. But this preoccupation with the beauty, simplicity, and clarity of share prices and profits has been a catastrophe. It's essentially reductionism ad absurdum. It's driving the world to a point of climatic collapse and social fragmentation. And we're seeing the consequences of that all around us. What's wrong with this single measure? The answer is simple. Profits and share prices are wrong. They're incorrect measures of what they purport to report. They don't measure either the profit or the value that a company creates. They don't take account of the value of the benefits that a company creates or the destruction they cause. How can we seriously record a profit where a company has earned it from destroying part of a rainforest, cutting down an ancient woodland, accelerating the extinction of species, employing people at below living wages, selling addictive products, or avoiding their fair share of taxes? Those aren't profits any more than the earnings of a burglar stealing someone else's property. It's theft. But the only distinction from theft is that we've legalized it. Not only have we legalized it, we've encouraged and immortalized it by incentivizing it and honoring the wealth that is accumulated from it. Like a patient preoccupied with their temperature, we've created an addiction, not just to the addictive products that are the source of share price increases, but to the share prices themselves. Furthermore, we've gone on to suggest that anything else is a muddle, confusion, impractical, and inefficient, a distraction from the simplicity of share prices and profits. How could we have possibly got to this point? I could give an academic answer and say that it's the beauty of the economic models that has driven a false belief in the power of competitive markets, the efficiency of financial markets, and the ability of regulation to constrain bad behavior. I could give a sociological answer and talk about the power of vested interests in preserving the status quo, where a small elite benefits at the expense of others and the natural world. I could give a historical explanation in terms of our enthusiasm for Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, while forgetting his theory of moral sentiments. But there is, I think, a more fundamental reason. We've forgotten why we are creating and running businesses. It's not to profit, it's to solve problems, to solve those problems that you and I and societies and the natural world face. And in the process, to produce profits. And profits are essential. They're the lifeblood of business. Without them, we don't have the investors that are needed to resource the solving of problems at scale. But profits are not the purpose. Instead, they're the product of purposes of solving problems. It's a simple confusion of cause and effect. Solving problems are the cause, profits are the effect. The reason this distinction is so important is that we need to ensure that we're not profiting from producing problems. And to do that, we need to incur the full cost of avoiding, mitigating, remedying, and compensating for any problems that we cause. But even this is not enough. It's no longer enough to just avoid causing problems. Net zero will not do. The crises have become too great. People are looking to business to proactively solve problems. Paul Pullman, the former CEO of Unilever, says in his book that he's recently published, it's not just about being net zero, it's about being net positive. It's not just the cost of avoiding, mitigating, remedying, compensating for detriments and problems that companies need to incur, but the cost of solving problems. That is what defines a true profit of a company. Companies need to innovate in finding ways of addressing the toughest problems profitably. And if companies do not know how to do that, then they need to partner with others to help them to do it. We need not just to recognize our purposes and the true costs of delivering them, but we also need inspirational leadership to achieve it. We need cooperative, collaborative leadership rather than the competitive, destructive leadership of the past. That is what makes for true profit and shared as well as share value. In September of this year, the British Academy, the UK National Academy of the Humanities and the Social Sciences, published its final report on the future of the corporation. It's the culmination of 4 years of research, consultation, and engagement. It draws on hundreds of academics, leading thinkers, business leaders, entrepreneurs, investors, lawyers, policymakers, regulators, and people from numerous walks of life around the world. What emerges is a very clear and precise message. The change that has occurred since the British Academy produced its first report on the future of the corporation in 2000 has exceeded anything that was expected. The idea that was put forward in that first report of the centrality of corporate purpose as solving problems profitably has caught on in many places around the world. The best and most successful businesses in the world increasingly recognize the importance of purpose to their success. Furthermore, a large proportion of businesses recognize the need for corporate purposes to adopt new methods of operating, for their investors to adopt new ways of engaging with them to promote corporate purposes. And most businesses believe that there should be a change in law and regulation to support the adoption of corporate purposes. Now, encouraging though this is, inequality, social exclusion, climate change, extinction of species, and mistrust have nevertheless continued to intensify. The final report of the Future of the Corporation program that has just been published seeks to address these concerns head on. It emphasizes the centrality of business in solving, not causing problems. It sets out the specific public policies and business practices that deliver purposeful businesses around law, regulation, ownership, governance, measurement, performance, finance, and investment. Policies and practices that promote business purposes of profitably solving problems. And it argues that there are two key mechanisms that underpin this. The first is to make it easier for companies to implement corporate purposes. The second is to hold them to account for doing it, what we term implementation and accountability. Promote the entrepreneurship, innovation, ownership, finance, investment, competition, and incentives that implement corporate purposes, and ensure that the ownership, governance, stewardship, measurement, and regulation are in place to hold businesses and their board of directors to account for doing it. Without that implementation, companies lack the resources, drive, and support to adopt corporate purposes of solving problems. Without that accountability, corporate purpose statements lack conviction and fail to build trust. Companies' commitments to fulfill their purposes must have consequences for those with the responsibility for making them happen, namely the boards of directors and controlling shareholders, if they are to be trusted and believed. The report takes the UK as an example of a country that is well placed to do this. It already has the policies that are needed, the Companies Act, the Corporate Governance Code, and the Stewardship Code. But they lack the implementation and accountability to really deliver purposeful businesses. What is required is an evolution and enhancement, not a revolution of current policies, but it's an evolution that will have profoundly beneficial effects on the performance of businesses as well as our environments and societies. Specifically, the report suggests that the primary duty of directors should be to determine, implement, and deliver their company purposes. Owners of companies should use their rights of approval and removal of directors to ensure that the appropriate leadership and oversight is in place in companies. Directors should be accountable to their shareholders and stakeholders for fulfillment of their purposes. They should measure and report to their shareholders and their stakeholders on their company's performance against their purposes. They should promote the values and cultures that empower everyone in their organizations to take responsibility for their part of their company purposes and align incentives throughout their organizations with them. Regulators, standard setters, and auditors should ensure that companies do not profit from creating detriments. Financial institutions should provide funding at the scale, location, duration, and form required for companies to resource their purposes. And governments should partner with and procure from companies to promote their company purposes. The report demonstrates the profound effects these policies and practices will have in the context of those major national and global challenges around climate change and biodiversity, economic and social recovery from COVID, inequality, social exclusion, and regional disparities, and the impact of the technological revolution on the future of work. The report uses these challenges to illustrate how purposeful businesses working in partnership with government, investors, and regulators can become a powerful, credible, trustworthy, and effective instrument for addressing them. And only purposeful businesses can do that. But only purposeful businesses working in tandem with government can really deliver it. The $100 trillion of assets under management to which Mark Carney referred at COP26 must be managed in tandem with the trillions of dollars that governments around the world have committed if we are ready to solve the mounting crisis we face. Currently, the interests of the private and public sectors are not well aligned, but in contrast, businesses that exist to solve problems profitably align their private interests in making money with the public interests of governments in society and the environment. The recommendations of the British Academy report should, I hope, lay the foundations for a comprehensive programme that can be adopted by businesses and governments around the world. And it should provide a unifying message of trust around which every one of us can rally, not just as business leaders, investors, policymakers, and regulators, but also as consumers, employees, communities, students, researchers, educators, and citizens in the world for the sake of our well-being, flourishing, and economic prosperity. To sum up, purposes of solving problems profitably, not profiting from producing problems, should be at the heart of business in the 21st century. Inspiring transformative leadership, promoting collaboration and cooperation should be driving that and embedding it throughout their organizations. Business schools should be teaching and researching it. Governments should be determining common purposes of solving the major challenges of the 21st century, and business should be partnering with governments in delivering it. This is what this coming decade, I believe, will be all about, and anyone who is not on it will, I think, be out of it. Thank you.